Over this past weekend, we saw numerous brawls break out all over the country as tensions flared during rivalry week. Players were pepper sprayed, flags were planted at midfield, and chaos in general was at an all-time high. Teams booked their tickets to the college football playoffs with victories, while others dropped the ball and now find themselves without a seat at the table. The regular season is now over, and as teams prepare for their conference championships, I thought we could look at every team's remaining path to the playoffs. But first, let's take a second to remember the teams who unfortunately are out of the running. Starting with the Big 12 wildcards. It was a lot of fun while it lasted for these teams, and going into last week, they somehow all still had a chance to sneak into the Big 12 Conference Championship. But things just didn't end up going their way. Texas Tech, TCU, and Baylor won their games over the weekend, but so did the actual contenders in the Big 12, so it didn't matter in the end. These teams were always ridiculous long shots, but we will miss them all the same. Moving over to their Big 12 counterparts, we have BYU and Colorado. Where did it all go wrong for these teams? Just a few weeks ago, they both controlled their own destiny, but Kansas took it upon themselves to ruin their seasons just for the fun of it. Now, Arizona State and Iowa State have taken their spots in the Big 12 championship, and these programs who once found themselves in the playoff picture are now forced to go slumming it with the other bowl-eligible teams. BYU and Colorado serve as a cautionary tale of how a team's fortune can completely flip after only a week or two. Next, we have Texas A&M. Texas A&M had a clear but challenging road to the playoffs. Beat Texas, and then beat Georgia in the SEC championship, and they would be through. Unfortunately, they couldn't even get past the first of those two challenges, and now find themselves not only out of the playoffs, but out of the AP rankings entirely. The last team we'll talk about amongst the fallen is Tulane. Tulane lost to Memphis on Thursday, and lost their only chance to make the playoffs through the 5th conference winner spot in the process. They now find themselves with 3 losses and will more than likely be out of the college football playoff rankings. Even if they win the AAC, it just won't be enough. Boise State and UNLV play for the Mountain West, and with those teams being ranked ahead of Tulane, either team would get in over them with a win. Now, we can move over to the teams that are mortal locks to make the playoffs, starting with Oregon. Oregon has had their spot secured for a few weeks now. They are the only undefeated team remaining in college football and will play Penn State for the Big Ten championship. With a win there, they'll be the number 1 seed in the playoffs. With a loss, however, I believe they'll 100% get the 5 seed, losing their bye, but arguably being in a more advantageous position. Stay with me here. Let's say they get the 1 seed. Sure, Oregon wouldn't have to play in the first round, but they would get the winner of the 8 seed versus the 9 seed. Obviously, we won't know these teams until the final rankings, but it could easily be teams like Indiana, Ohio State, Tennessee, or Georgia that end up here. Currently, Georgia has the 3rd best odds to win it all, and Ohio State has the 4th best odds. Not necessarily the types of teams I'd like to see in my first playoff game. On the flip side, let's say Oregon loses in the Big Ten championship and gets the 5 seed. In the first round, they would either play the winner of the Big 12 in Arizona State or Iowa State, or they would more than likely play UNLV if they win the Mountain West. To make things simple, let's just say they play the Big 12 winner. They would be heavily favored to pick up a win there, where they would be more than likely to play Boise State in the next round, a team they have already beaten. I don't know about you, but I would much rather prefer an additional game against what would most likely be the 2 worst teams in the playoffs than one powerhouse. Now moving over to Texas. This team got past their rival Texas A&M over the weekend at their place and punched their ticket to the SEC championship. If they win this weekend against Georgia, they're guaranteed the 2 seed, or if Oregon ends up losing to Penn State, they'll probably get the 1 seed. With a loss, they'll most likely end up as the 5 or 6 seed, so they're guaranteed a bye, or at the very least, home field advantage in round 1. The next lock we have is Penn State. Ohio State falling to Michigan opened the door for Penn State to sneak their way into the Big Ten championship. After Minnesota almost ruined their season, Penn State bounced back and beat the brakes off of Washington during rivalry week. Now, they'll play Oregon, where a win will guarantee them a top 2 seed, and a loss would see them fall somewhere between the 6th or 8th seed, I'd imagine, which would still afford them home field advantage in the first round. Shifting gears to a team that won't be playing until the first round of the playoffs, we have Notre Dame. Notre Dame is an independent team, and as such, won't be playing during championship week. This means they have no chance to receive a bye, but after beating USC with 2 90-yard pick sixes late into the game, They've done enough to not only ensure their entry into the playoffs, but home field advantage as well. I'd be pretty shocked if they were anything other than the 5 or 6 seed in the playoffs. Up next, we have Georgia. A few weeks ago, they were the first team out according to the college football playoff rankings, but have fallen into a very nice spot, mostly due to the chaos around them with teams like Alabama and Ole Miss really shitting the bed. Georgia very nearly found themselves on the hot seat after Haynes King and Georgia Tech tried to rain on Georgia's parade over the weekend. If you didn't see it, this game went to a staggering 8 overtimes, just one shy of the college football record, and ended in heartbreak for Georgia Tech. Their quarterback, Haynes King, has another year of eligibility left, and I'll be interested to see what he does this offseason. The dude played his heart out, and he's definitely someone to keep an eye on next season, assuming he doesn't go pro this year.
Kind of tired of feeling like this. Tired of always, playing your heart out, doing all this to the last play and just always coming up short. I'm just tired of feeling that way right now.
But back to Georgia. They're now in the SEC championship against Texas and would take the 2 seed with a win. If they were to lose, I'd be interested to see how true the committee sticks to their word of not punishing conference losers. Either way, I think Georgia will at the very least maintain a position that gives them home field advantage. I'll just group together the last 3 teams in this tier, as it's more than likely they'll be in this order in the playoffs because they have no games left to play. Tennessee, Ohio State, Indiana. I'm making this video before the college football playoff rankings drop, so this could be a little different by the end of the week, but I think it'll be fairly accurate, maybe with Tennessee and Ohio State being flipped. Tennessee handled Vanderbilt over the weekend, while Ohio State lost the game for the 4th year in a row. This puts these teams close together, where it's pretty much a coin flip on who will be ranked ahead of who. They both have a record of 10-2, with one of their losses coming to a powerhouse school, and the other coming to an unranked opponent. However, Ohio State has an extra win over current ranked teams, with both of them being playoff contenders. They also have the upper hand when it comes to strength of schedule, so I think it would make sense for the Buckeyes to edge them out. But it should be worth noting that last week, the committee had SMU ranked ahead of Indiana, despite having the same record, same amount of ranked wins, and a worse strength of schedule. So they've shown that it isn't the end-all be-all. And while we're on the topic of Indiana, I think we can safely say they'll be behind both of these teams. Despite having a better record, they still have no ranked wins, which really hurts them. Also, Ohio State beat them comfortably, so it would be shocking to see them ranked ahead there. Indiana is firmly in the college football playoffs after putting on a massacre against Purdue in the game for the Old Oaken bucket, but it would take some sort of miracle for them to have a top 8 seed to secure home field advantage. Now moving into the SMU tier, I'm sure you can guess the only team is, of course, SMU. This team is one of a kind in the playoff race, as they don't fall into any of the more broad categories. They aren't a mortal lock, as with a loss, the committee could decide to drop them entirely, and I don't think too many people outside of SMU fans would complain all too much. They would obviously be going back on what they said about conference losers, but this is a committee that left out a 13-0 ACC team last year just because their starting quarterback got hurt. They are not afraid to make these tough decisions. SMU also doesn't belong in the next grouping, which will be teams who need to win their conference championship to even stand a chance, because SMU does technically hold an at-large spot for the time being. They're in a weird sort of limbo right now, and I certainly would be treating the ACC championship game against Clemson like the Super Bowl, because with a loss, they're giving the committee an out to put in a school with a massive fan base like Alabama. Moving over to the win and in category, we can start with SMU's opponent this weekend, Clemson. It's really simple for every team that falls here. Win, and you're good. Lose, and we'll see you next year. For Clemson, an at-large bid is officially off the table as they lost to South Carolina over the weekend. But luckily for them, that game meant nothing for ACC play, and Miami's loss to Syracuse booked their ticket to the ACC championship. They scheduled Georgia week 1, which definitely hurt their chances as they were blown out there, and they had a pretty ugly loss to Louisville at home, but they've hung on, and the cards have fallen in their favor. With a win against SMU this weekend, they would lock down a bye for the playoffs. The next team we have is Boise State. They've been frontrunner to take that 5th conference bid for most of the season, and now only UNLV stands in their way. I'll touch on UNLV soon, but with a win here, Boise is guaranteed either the 3rd or 4th seed, which means a bye regardless. However, with a loss, I think they're out. There's just no chance the committee lets a 2-loss group of 5 teams snag an at-large bid. They would let in any of the 3-loss SEC teams before that happened, and they would use their 86th ranked strength of schedule as the reason why. Boise beat UNLV this year in Vegas, so I assume they'll be feeling confident they can get the job done again, especially with the best running back in the country. I'll group together the last two teams in this tier as they play each other this weekend: Arizona State and Iowa State. Who would have thought 2 weeks ago that this would be the Big 12 championship? Neither team was even in the college football playoff rankings for week 11, yet here we are. If that isn't proof that anything is possible in college football, I truly don't know what is. The winner of this game is in, and the loser is out. Simple enough. The only slight complication is where they will be seated. The rankings aren't out as I'm making this video, and I can already assure you that neither team will be in a spot higher than 12. If Boise wins the Mountain West, the winner here will get the 12 seed almost without a doubt. Maybe there's a world where if it's Arizona State that wins, they could move up to 11, but the important thing to know is that they would not get a first round bye. However, if UNLV wins the Mountain West, expect the winner of this to take the 4th seed and the final bye. Coming into our second to last tier, we just have UNLV. Another team in a somewhat unique position, although I think it is a little more cut and dry than SMU's. If UNLV loses to Boise State, they're out, no doubt about it. I'll briefly cover a scenario where they could win and still be out, but only very briefly because I think it's pretty ridiculous and far-fetched. It'll also probably be dispelled by the time the college football playoff rankings come out. Let's say UNLV wins super unconvincingly against Boise State. Just a horrible game where both teams look terrible. And a team like Army, with their only loss coming against Notre Dame, kicks Tulane's teeth in the ACC championship. In this already unlikely scenario, there could be a world where Army jumps UNLV, but I don't personally see it. By the time the new rankings come out, Army would have to be at least within probably 2 spots of UNLV, and even then it's unlikely. Alright, enough of that. Let's just talk about this UNLV team. I think a lot of people assumed UNLV would be an afterthought when their quarterback, Matt Sluka, decided to sit out the rest of the season after only 3 games because he felt the school didn't hold up their end of the bargain when he came as a transfer from Holy Cross. Whatever the case may be there, that left UNLV turning to their backup, Haj Malik Williams, who has been an excellent replacement. Sluka only played against Houston, Utah Tech, and Kansas, who are now all 4-8, 1-11, and 5-7 respectively. Williams, on the other hand, took a Syracuse team that just beat Miami to overtime and Boise State down to the wire. Sure, they lost both those games, but I think this quarterback is flying heavily under the radar and should be someone to watch out for if they make the playoffs, as he has a better completion percentage than Sluka and more yards per attempt. Long story short, as only 4-point dogs to Boise State, don't count UNLV out just yet. If you've made it this far in the video, feel free to subscribe for more. Now let's get into the last tier. Entering this final tier, we have teams that just have to hope. I'll start with Alabama because pray is honestly a little harsh for them. In reality, whether you believe it's right or not, this team is more than likely getting into the playoffs in an at-large position with 3 losses without having to play in their conference championship. In case you don't believe me, let's turn to the betting odds. On Monday, Alabama was plus 100 to make the playoffs, giving them an in-pride probability of about 50% to make it in. Just a day later, at the time of recording this, their odds have increased to minus 250, or what I found to be a 71.4% probability. For those who don't sportsbet, this is an insane jump in odds without any games having taken place, and really solidified my belief that they're going to make it. When we look at the other teams in this category, Alabama is the benchmark they have to surpass. If SMU loses to Clemson, they'll be around this category, but for the sake of these teams, we'll assume SMU wins because any other outcome would be the dagger for all of their hopes. We'll look to perhaps the most deserving team to get in, South Carolina. When I made my first video, I got a lot of comments about how I glossed over this team, and they were right. I mean, I had them grouped with LSU for crying out loud, and LSU was the team I covered more. So I'll be the first to say I was completely wrong. I thought this team had no chance, but watching them these past few weeks has been absolute cinema. Whether it was their shootout with Mizzou, or their more recent thriller against Clemson, this team is just a ton of fun. Lenore Sellers, the freshman quarterback for South Carolina, is going to provide entertainment to college football fans for years to come. However, despite being hands down the hottest team in college football, with 6 straight wins against formidable teams, minus Wofford, sorry Wofford fans, I think South Carolina's run is going to be cut short by the committee. They're currently behind Alabama in the rankings, and I just don't see that changing, even after they beat Clemson. This will all be decided by the committee Tuesday night, so by the time this video comes out, it could be all over anyways if they're behind Alabama. I just don't think the committee will overlook the fact that these two teams have the same record, very even strength of schedules. But the nail in the coffin, Bama has already beaten them head to head. The next team is Miami. Miami held their destiny in their hands, and Colin McCord took that from them, bringing Syracuse back from a 21-0 deficit to win. Having 2 losses to go with the 55th ranked strength of schedule is more than likely enough to leave this team out, even if they have arguably the best quarterback in college football. I'll end off by briefly mentioning a few teams that I have heard people try to make arguments for. As much as Lane Kiffin tweets about how Ole Miss should get in, they just don't have a path in my eyes. They haven't done anything to jump the teams ahead of them, and I think they will surely be out. People have made arguments for BYU, but if you think they're jumping from being ranked 19th into an at-large playoff spot after a 12-point win against Houston, you're insane. And finally, I saw ESPN giving Louisiana a 2% chance to get in, but I think it's more like 0% if I'm being honest. Their strength of schedule is currently 119th, and they have 2 losses. Unless ESPN believes the Mountain West winner is going to refuse their place in the playoffs, this team has no chance. I tried to crank out this video as quickly as I could. Some of it could become obsolete by the time the rankings come out, so I'll leave a comment with my thoughts about how the rankings affect things. But anyway, thanks for bearing with my sick voice, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.